created and managed by J. Allen Hynek, the ufologist, but also the astronomer from Northwestern, and also the main Google consultant. And so I knew him in high school, and then in 1970, Blue Book got shut down. So Hynek went and he wrote his book, The UFO Experience, where he created the term, a chapter title called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I was living outside of Chicago as a Purdue student, and he made an announcement in December of 73, that he was tired of like working for the Air Force, that they didn't give him what he wanted really, and he was going to start his own UFO center, and he called it the Center for UFO Studies, which, because he was an astronomer, he patterned it after the Center for Meteorite Studies. And so, since I met him in high school, as soon as he announced that on the first spring break, my friend and I went there to see him at the observatory at the Northwestern. He remembered us, and he volunteered at first. And then I ended up on the board, and I worked with him until his death. He was the UFOs. So he was my mentor for the UFOs. So he would have loved Roswell. He was open-minded to the end. So I started with the center in '74. I met Don in like 1980 through Dr. Hynek, because he's working on it too. And then I first came down here to Don in 91. And that's how I'm here now. Oh.
Short man. You see where I have my one leg?
No respect for age. None.
This is your.
That's mine.
Okay.
I used to be a Boy Scout.
All right. My name is Tom Carey. I'm a native Philadelphian. I always wanted to be a baseball player ever since I was 6 years old, and here I am. I got interested, to cut to the chase, in the Roswell case when the 1980 book, Roswell Incident, came out. It blew me away as far as being interested in other UFO cases. There was nothing like this Roswell case, at least to me. And my degrees are in anthropology, and part of the story was that the craft and bodies were recovered by a group of archaeologists from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. So that's about 1991. And I used to get with the International UFO Reporter from QFOS, and there were these two fellas, one named Kevin Randall and one named Don Schmitt, who were reopening the Roswell case. And the more I read about that, I said, oh my goodness, I'd really like to be involved in that. So I called up Kevin Randall. I said, what have you done about finding the archaeologists? And he said, well, we haven't really done a lot. I said, look, they're from Philadelphia. I can catch the train. I live in Philadelphia. I'll see what I can find out down at the university. So that's how I became involved. I stayed with the group, Kevin and Don, and I have paired specifically with Don since 1998 to continue a proactive, and I underline that word, proactive investigation of the case, which means you're not just sitting around waiting for something to plop on your desk. You're out there shaking the tree, looking for witnesses. So it's been my honor to work with Don, and we are still on the case, and here we are. Oh, we've written, I have to say that, I was always one that when I had a book report due in high school, I always let it go to the last minute, and I would buy a classic comic book and go with that. I was not a writer. We have co-authored, I believe, Don, 11 or 12 books together on the Roswell incident, and I never thought I, would write anything, but some of them have been worldwide bestsellers for UFOs. So here's Don.
It all began when I was a child. I thank my fellow panel members for some of the kind, flattering comments. And 75 years. And who would have thought that we may be on the brink of some major disclosure at some point. And when I can't emphasize enough that we fall short if we don't include Roswell. Then no matter what is stated, no matter what comes from Washington, that if they don't include Roswell, then we have failed. Because we are talking about the granddaddy of all UFO cases. We're talking about the case that many of us have experienced, that all around the world it's a household word. And I can assure you, it's not weather balloon. When you sit down and you have dinner with cosmonauts and all they do is ask you questions about Roswell, we've made a dent. We certainly have, made this a global incident that nothing else compares to. Why do you think you have the British Roswell, the Russian Roswell, and the Mexican Roswell? No, because it's become synonymous with the crash of a craft of unknown origin that after 75 years, and for all those that sadly took it to their graves, unfortunately we have the families. And Tom and I and the others I'm sure would be honored that one of the people we have here this evening is the son of the very base adjutant from the Roswell Army Airfield in 1947. Back then, that was Major Patrick Saunders. His son, Tim, would stand for a moment. So, thank you for being here. And one of the brave officers who was brave enough at the end, who finally opened up. Finally, at least told his family that it was all true. I want to just add this yet before we get started. I tire of colleagues who the best they can muster is, well, I believe something happened. Well, that's the historic record. And the fact that the Roswell Army Airfield put out a press release that they had captured a flying saucer. Again, historic record. But I can't emphasize enough that we could have former presidents Trump, Clinton, Carter, late Senator Barry Goldwater, the late Congressman Stephen Schmitt of New Mexico, the former governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson. They could all be sitting here this evening, and they would all lament the fact they couldn't get the truth about Roswell. So please, my colleagues, if you know something more than even the president does, we'd love to know it. Because you're selling us all short by saying, well, something happened. Sorry, go read the books. Go listen to the testimony of the witnesses. And then tell me they're all liars. Well, they all fell short. Point being, Roswell is the biggest case that ever happened for a reason. Because it happened. No other reason. We don't need to apologize or explain anything more. It happened. It happened. Thank you.
So that's a good segue into the first couple questions. We'll have a couple questions just to talk about more current affairs, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, you all. The first question being, you mentioned the hearings, and crashes came up, and they, the Bray, who was part of Naval Intelligence, which is important because there's two different organizations that were represented there. And he said the UAP Task Force, which is a group that he was representing, didn't have any materials or crash information. However, the topic was also introduced in kind of an indirect way with the introduction of this Wilson document, which alleges that this admiral found where essentially back engineering of an alleged craft happened, and that he couldn't get access to it. So I guess my first question would be kind of to the point in what he brought up. Do you see this topic being brought up if there are future hearings or, in further statements coming from these organizations? And if so, in what manner? And if not, what can be done to make that happen? James, your thoughts? You can also give, ideas about the hearings overall, if you want to as well.
The only comment I would make is that as long as there's a national security aspect, the possibility of developing weapons from retro technology, I personally seriously doubt they're going to tell us anything of significance. They just won't do it.
kind of like had this conversation a little bit just before I came in here. And I made this comment that there's two ways that we're going to find out for sure. And this is just my honest opinion on this. One is just like something that's going to happen very similar to or identical to the old Gort. What's the name of that movie, guys?
The Day the Earth Stood Still.
All right. That's right. The Day the Earth Stood Still. So
That's the Frank Kimbler story.
yeah. Hey, don't pick on me. I had COVID in February, and I've got fragments of stuff that's missing, especially the part about Dawn. I have no idea where that went to. So anyway, something needs to land on the front lawn of the White House, or on that, and that would prove it beyond a doubt. Just land there and get out, or land at one of our Air Force bases with all the media around and everything. So that's disclosure number one. The other one is somebody's got to come up with some undisputable high-performance material that's in hand where they're not hiding anything. And that's the kind of stuff where somebody says, look, I have, we've talked about the Roswell memory flow, but there are other things that have been found that are sitting in people's laboratories. They're sitting in what are so-called warehouses. And you know what? There's a lot of that material that if it was brought forward, I'm sure that it would be discussion over. We have ET, it's there, and these are the materials that we have. It's there. So those are the things that I have. We always bring forward this thing about the national security. And you know what? Somebody probably has some of this stuff squirreled away in their closet somewhere. They just need to bring it out and show it to us. And that'll be the end of it right there.
I think it's important to look at the incredible lengths they've gone to deny everything about this subject. There was discussion at one of these panels about Area 51 and the fact that they have the right to use lethal force if you come near. They have debunked, they've discredited people, they've ruined people's reputations. It used to be the norm that if you were an average guy who saw one of these things and you came forward with these claims, a lot of people you knew, including teachers and doctors, would refer you to see a psychiatrist because it couldn't be true. And why couldn't it be true? Because the government has told us all it's not true. So reputations have been ruined. Now, they've done this with intense deliberation. And so I guess one question would be, why would they change their mind? Why would they, for something they have protected so completely, why would they decide it's in their best interest, the country's best interest, or anyone's best interest to expose something like Roswell, which involved threats against so many civilians and silence for decades? And I don't know what's going to bring that about. I think as far as the hearing we saw so far, I think that if you look to their video, that kind of tells you the state of their intention to expose everything to you. They brought in a video machine that didn't work. They couldn't get it to show on the screen. They couldn't get stop motion. They chose a video that showed one little light half hidden by a street lamp or something. And they said, there's probably others we could show you, but we wanted to show you this. Why did they choose that? I don't think anybody's working very hard to expose anything with having these hearings. But I'd sure like to see it turn around differently. And I think that Bigelow Aerospace, which has at first admitted to having these materials from the crash and then stepped back and changed it to, well, we were authorized to get materials if they had them, but we don't have any. People are going to get caught in these lies, I think. And I think there's a really interesting film coming in the fall that's going to penetrate a lot of this, called Accidental Truth, which is truth that comes out accidentally when you're interrogating somebody that knows something that they want to protect, and they slip up. Somebody's going to slip up. I just hope it's soon.
Well, in all truth, I have to say that I have always pretty much been a disclosure skeptic. I know there's a great deal of talk about how, you know, they're finally going to tell us something important, you know, and that sort of thing. Well, I haven't really ever had any reason to think that. Ask yourself, for example, okay, the Roswell incident happened 75 years ago. What has the government said to us to the effect that at least something anomalous happened here? What, even if they don't say what it is, you know, what have they ever said to that effect? And I think you'll quickly convince yourself that
Nothing.
it's not a word, absolutely nothing. Whatever we find out, we're going to dig out for ourselves. See, somebody said to me one time, well, don't you think it's really about time for them to come clean? Well, you know what? It's a little late for clean. There's nothing clean about this business. Essentially, we're talking about people who have one interest in mind, one interest in their hearts, that is perpetual re-election. And what are they going to do? Are they going to say, okay, look, we finally decided to really be honest with you. We've been lying to you about everything important for the last 3/4 of a century, but we would like you to vote for us anyway. I don't think so. I think basically, you know, it's a nothing burger. You know, we're really going to have to just convince ourselves that anything we find out, it's going to be because we find out. They're not going to tell us.
I mentioned that I'm 80 years old. I do not believe there'll be disclosure in my lifetime. Looking at the audience, a lot of you are younger than I am. I'm hoping you will keep asking questions and demand answers. One of the biggest problems I see with disclosure is the media. When you watch a show or a news show that has anything to do with UFOs, always at the end of that show they make light of it. And one of the biggest problems I've had in the 30 years I've done research, Don Schmitt, Stanton Friedman, and I did a documentary for the National Geographic. We filmed for about 6 hours. We used my vehicle at times. We don't get paid for those interviews. When that show aired, the announcer at the end of the show said Roswell's a myth. We gave them years of research for this clown to say that Roswell's a myth. I wrote to National Geographic, I said, do not ever ask me again. I'm fed up with the media, I really am.
I regretfully have to agree with everybody else. I'm kind of skeptical too.
Louder, please.
Okay, I'm kind of skeptical too. I have to agree with everybody else. I started working with Heineck about UFOs as a separate thing in '74 at the Center for UFO Studies, which he formed then. And I was with him until his death in '85 with brain cancer, which was kind of premature because he was in really good health otherwise. And then John had joined us by maybe '79 or '80. But so Don had saw the same thing with Heineck. He was a public figure. He had been with Blue Book, but he was on his own now as a scientist. And every couple of years, he'd call us up or he'd tell us in a meeting, I just got a letter from somebody, or I heard from some colonels, some retired colonels, and they're promising that if I fly out to, say, a base in Los Angeles or a base in New Mexico or something, they're going to show me the films, they're going to prove something to me. And he was skeptical. He was a good scientist. And he would roll his eyes, but he would take the tickets, he would go, he'd come back, he'd go, there's nothing to it. And Don I know, remembers this, so it happened consistently. So we're not believing very much of what the political grifters are telling us. It's, okay, everybody, we're on your side now. Why? Yes, it is. So that's, I'm sorry to spoil everybody's.
You can use 2 mics if you
Is the question about disclosure, is that
The question was mostly around the hearings and the kind of the mention in the hearings, but it's essentially, yeah, disclosure. all lead to a disclosure about Roswell?
I've never believed in disclosure because I think in the end they're going to do what they're doing now, is not giving you what you want to hear. The previous government hearings were about 54 years ago, 1968, and they were a result of these sightings they were having up in Dexter and Ann Arbor, Michigan. So Gerald Ford, who was a representative in the House of Representatives, called these meetings. The other thing that came from that, as I recall, was it just one book. That was it, and everything went away. Here, it's a little better because we had these videos that Luis Elizondo put out in 2017, which I think precipitated all of this. And so the momentum was building for, we want some answers here, we want some answers here. And the Defense Department, they were already in a hole because the videos were out, everybody in the world has seen them, and the Defense Department said, well, they're legitimate, so they couldn't say it was a weather balloon. Maybe they tried, but they couldn't say that. So the government, the Senate, tasked the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies in 2020 to come forward in 180 days with a report that tell us what you know. Well, if you saw those hearings, I like to be blunt. They were a joke. They were a joke. What they did is they set an arbitrary baseline of we're not going to look at cases older than 2004, which was that USS Nimitz case that one of the videos depicted. So they're going forward from 2004, and they're only going to accept cases that have come through official channels, like in the Army, the Navy. So far, it's an all-Navy show. But they're not going to accept if a UFO comes and lands on your head, they're not going to accept that because you got to have all these gadgets to measure its mass to weight ratio and things like that. So what these hearings concentrated on, not what everybody wants to know. They wanted to know, okay, what are these UFOs? What are they? Where do they come from? What are they made of? Things like that. They didn't give you any of that. They gave you, we're going to set up a department where all UFO material that is reported is going to filter through, and we're going to inform the Senate in periodic times, like 4 times a year or something. That's all baloney. I'm sorry, folks. It's all baloney. All the cases you remember, at least I do, the real good ones all happened before 2004. Roswell being one of them, a number of others. So I just don't believe that we're going to get answers through the government. And unfortunately, the old saying, one has to land on the White House lawn before it comes to everybody will agree, yep, that's a UFO, and here we are. So that's what I believe.
And they won't even call it a UFO anymore.
Yeah, you read
UAPs. Oops.
Let's all agree that we haven't had such an opportunity now in over 60 years. And we all would agree that we don't expect the military to tell us anything. We're talking about the very arbiters of the cover-up since 1947. And that we should now think that they're having a guilt session and they finally feel they're good. The old order has all passed away. And one of the things we've often heard within military factions is that they too complain that the old order has not passed it down to the new order. So I'd also like to believe that many of the new officers would also like to have the truth. So we all agree we're not going to get it from the Pentagon. Before the recent hearings, we put out a statement that the Pentagon has never sent anyone up the Capitol Hill who could accidentally tell the truth. It just doesn't happen. But the onus is now on Congress. That's where we come in, because these are our duly elected representatives. And the fact that all they need to do is exercise their subpoena power, all they need to do is grant immunity to potential whistleblowers, and overnight they could blow this up. Just imagine all the military pilots, commercial, military, all the strategic air command officers, all the radar operators, if they have names, people that they would be encouraged to bring in and testify with immunity, without fear of any government reprisal. We all know of such people. We have such people, clearly. So it's not going to be a case of the Pentagon finally rolling over and saying, we're sorry. But Congress finally saying, why haven't we been told the truth all these years? Why have you been withholding this from us all these years? And that's where we come in. That's where we've reached out, Representative Gallagher, who was at the hearing. He was the only one who brought up a particular case. And the very idea that the Pentagon sat there, we've never heard of this, where an entire firing line of Atlas missiles shut down. They're liars. Or you're just that naive, because again, you're not going to slip and tell the truth. So we put the pressure on. As far as we turn the screws, because not on the Pentagon, but on our elected representatives, that you demand the truth for your elected constituents. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. Follow up to that?
I've got one follow-up question, because a name popped up, Bigelow. The very first research that was the very first analytical data, some of the first research analytical data that was done for me was done by Bigelow. And I asked Bigelow the following thing. I says, will you give me the data? They said yes. I says, will you tell me that if the data indicates that it's of extraterrestrial origin, you will tell me? No. That was the flat answer they gave me. They says, we'll give you all the data you want. We're not going to tell you where it came from. Honest to God, truth. That is exactly what they told me.
Just to clarify, at the time, they were working with OSAP and the Pentagon, which you probably weren't aware of.
I wasn't aware of that, but
Right.
that's exactly what they told me. They said,
Right.
we'll give you all, and I have the data. I have the data. And
Yeah.
they said, you're going to have to work it out yourself.
So they were probably bound by their agreement,
They wouldn't tell me.
most likely with the
I don't
Pentagon.
trust them any farther than I can.
Well, some of the group is kind of embedded in our community, and one of those people, I would say somewhat, is Dr. Eric Davis, who is part of the Bigelow group and was part of the OSAP group. And in fact, this Wilson document that I mentioned earlier is allegedly generated from him, although he won't speak to the issue. However, he has spoken to, he's definitely a Roswell advocate, and he has said that he believes that the craft, and perhaps one or two others, was retrieved. And he says he gets this information from essentially, kind of it's the word going around the different scientists who work on, these government projects. They kind of talk amongst each other, and what they've heard is that, the craft was retrieved. We couldn't make heads or tails of the technology. We put it away in a warehouse, kind of like Indiana Jones, and we kind of review our technology and once in a while try to decide, can we do something with this? We just haven't reached that level of technology to do anything with it yet. What do you all think of that statement? Do you think that could be a possibility, or does your research show otherwise?
I want to bring up another name in connection with that, and that is Colonel Corso. And what he said, does this contradict with that? He said that when he was stationed at the Foreign Technology Division of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, that he had access to the crash debris from Roswell. This was around 1960, and that he was ordered by the general he worked under to begin to distribute these materials out into private industry to get Bell Labs and other major research companies researching the possibility of learning something, back engineering, creating something from these materials, and that the government gave these materials carte blanche with the understanding that these companies could keep the patents on anything they discovered as a result of these Roswell materials and profit from them however they wished. So this is testimony from a career military man who worked on an advisory council to the White House. After World War II, he was in charge of intelligence for the Allies in Italy. He had an outstanding reputation. He was an arch-conservative senator who wrote a foreword to his book on Roswell, endorsing Corso as a person of great integrity, honesty, patriotism. And yet he's been kind of wiped out of the discussion. I don't know why they would have waited from 1947 to 1960 till Corso comes around to begin distributing this stuff. But that was his story, and it was issued in a book the day after Roswell, around the time of the 50th anniversary of the incident. But you don't hear his name come up much anymore.
I think there's a reason for that.
I just want to add one more sentence. That we do hear a lot about the materials now being in the hands of private industry. We hear that. It's no longer with the government.
I met Corso 3 times. He did the book signing here at the museum in 1997 at the 50th anniversary. I read his book. It's an excellent book as far as what he's saying, because everything he said is possible. The problem I have with Corso, you get to the back of the book, there's not one reference. And I feel that if he's not going to reference any of his claims, it's worthless.
James, did you have a
No,
comment here?
let it keep going, I'll defer.
Frank, you wanted to?
I'd like to make a comment in reference to this course. I've read his book. Never met the man. And of course, I've heard all the stories in reference to the technology. So here's an interesting, in this group, Don, I didn't tell Don this. When I was really little, I was living in California, and I had some babysitters by the name of Brad and Helen. I don't remember their last names. I wish I could. Brad worked for RCA at the time. And that was, we're talking about, I was about 10 years old at the time. And this gentleman told me some miraculous stories about things that they had in their test labs at RCA. Now, the time frame of this was probably early 60s is when this was. And let me tell you the things that he had in his lab that I didn't know about that I thought were amazing. He says, Frank, he says, we have TVs that are 1/4 of an inch thick that you can hang on a wall. He says, those are sitting in our test labs ready to, we don't have them ready for production yet, but he says, they're thin, we can hang them on a wall. He says, we've got, he showed me a tape, 8-track cassette tapes were big back then. He said, this is nothing. He says, wait till you see these little round plastic discs that we have. This is a true story. He brought home and showed me, he says, here is some of our technology that we use. So he brought in these really big, huge pieces of computer storage. He says, the storage now, he says, let me show you what the storage looks like. And he had this little tiny thing that was about the size of my flamenco playing thumbnail that was like this. And this was in the 1960s before any of us even saw this stuff. Did I see it? No. Did he tell me that they have it? Yes. Where did he get that technology from? Way cool. All sitting in RCA's laboratories in the early 60s, and we didn't have it out. True story.
Thanks. Anybody else want to comment on that, Eric Davis's theory? All right, and one last question before we open it up to the audience is, all of you are certainly very skeptical of the government and these communities coming forward. Avi Loeb, other scientists that are coming into this are very skeptical of the UFO community. And so how do we bridge that gap? Or do you think it's even necessary? We kind of don't want to play with them. They don't want to play with us. One scientist, Ted Peters, put it at our SU conference. Why aren't ufologists getting invited to, astronomers' barbecues type of thing to address this issue, which was a cute way to put it. But do we want to go to their barbecues? Should we? How do we start to bridge that gap? Don, did you have a...
Well, our former scientific director, Dr. Jalen Heidig, he had what was called his invisible college, because the subject for all these years has been so taboo. that it was a career breaker. I mean, most of us remember the experience of the late Dr. John Mack. Someone of that, someone who, just stood, I would say, like Mack would stand above any of these scientists. And yet, it almost cost him, his position at Harvard Medical School. Have we turned that corner? Are they now extending an olive branch and saying that now we need to meet halfway, work together? I've heard within the last week that the current international director of the Mutual UFO Network, Dave McDonald, has been in Washington 4 times in the last number of weeks. Is that olive branch? Is that realized? But then we went through that with the Conduct Committee where they invited in NICAP officials to provide all their documents, and they were never used. So what we have to be cautious about is that we're not having the carrot dangled once again, and they're going to reel us back and say, gotcha, all over. The advantage we have is we know the history. They don't. And unfortunately, those that are representing us, that the media is typically calling to represent us, know nothing about this subject. And it's not that we cry foul as much as that we still exercise our authority collectively as a group. We still have too many people that are standing independently and saying they represent us. They don't. And that's why, as we sit here this evening, as far as collectively, we choose to stand together. We choose, as far as to represent the field together. And we are the ones who then go to the media and say, you have to acknowledge the history. You have to know where we've been to know where we're going. And that we don't repeat the same mistakes. And we're the ones, just imagine, just collectively, this dais here this evening, how many years of accumulated research? We're talking hundreds. Nobody else can make that claim. And I, for one, Abbey Loeb, even with his experience, great. But you know nothing about the history of the subject. So please, let's sit down and over the beer, let's talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and it's very fair for us. NICAP, that was an awful experience. There was so much hope at that time, just like there's hope now.
Yeah.
That was lost, and all the hopes were dashed. But yeah, Tom.
Yes, I'd like to make the point that the subject of UFOs has come actually a long way from the 1950s when it was totally taboo. It's still taboo in many circles, but it's been acceptable. It's become acceptable to most scientific people, educational people, when you say, do you believe that there's other life in the universe? And they'll go, oh yes, I certainly believe that statistically there's other life in the universe. Well, do you believe that some of that life in the universe has ever visited Earth? That's where the divide comes. We believe, certainly because of Roswell, we have been visited, and we may have been visited, a number of times. But the scientific community will say, no, I don't believe that we've ever been visited. And so we still have that divide, Alejandro, between, yes, that part of acceptance, but no, I don't believe we've ever been visited, which there's so much evidence that we have been visited and are still being visited. Unfortunately, most of it is on the cable TV channels. You don't see it on the mainstream media very often. Usually when you do, it's always ended with a little tongue-in-cheek smart remark. So we still have a ways to go. And like I said, I still think it's going to take something really stupendous that they can't say it's anything other than a bona fide UFO that landed, crashed, or some other event.
All right, thank you. Yes.
I would certainly like to be hopeful too that these things will change, but at present the fact certainly is that there's always a big kind of stigma attached to anybody's interest in UFOs. A little story I'll share with you. I just retired a few years ago after teaching university mathematics for 50 years. And my last teaching post was here at the college in town. And while I was at this campus, I applied for tenure at the appropriate time. And in my big application package, you know, and really it's quite a process, I actually included some of my UFO-related books and articles. And I got tenure. But you know what? That's because this is Roswell. You know, at most universities, that would have been the kiss of death. Essentially, if I had included anything like that in my application package, you know, they would have said, well, you know, we were following you up to a point. We were taking you seriously until now, you know, but if that's the kind of stuff you're going to start talking about, then, you know, maybe we have to think about whether we want to give you tenure or not. Unfortunately, a lot of people are too inclined to be told what to think instead of thinking for themselves. And so, you know, it quickly gets around the, well, you know, don't listen to this person because they're interested in UFOs and you shouldn't take that seriously. I had another point, I'm trying to think what it was.
Maybe while you're thinking of that point, I did an interview with a panel of PhDs recently, all tenured, and I asked them a question, you know, with your students who are interested in these topics, you know, what do you recommend that they even touch this topic? And although the astrophysicist said he does like to build exercises around this, they mostly agreed with the one lady who said, I would not advise any of my students to touch this topic or any paranormal topic until they're tenured.
I remember what it was I was going to add too. I was once on a discussion online, I believe it was one of those things on Amazon, you know, where you comment on a book and then somebody replies to your comment and so forth. And it was about something unrelated to the whole UFO subject. And somebody popped up at one point in the discussion and said, oh, well, I looked you up. I see you're a UFO investigator, so nothing you say about any subject could be taken seriously. That's the kind of stuff you run into. You know, it really is. And I think we've got a long way to go to defeat that attitude.
Mm-hmm. I think a couple of, Don, you have something?
The professor who made the comment about not until they would reach tenure as far as UFO assignment. The first one who made such a comment was Edward Buchanan at the end of the Condon Report in 1968, when he stated that any teacher that would suggest that his students study UFOs should be horsewhipped. So we've come a little bit
further. James.
I have a gnawing question, and I've been trying to figure out who to ask or how, and it's the number one thing on my mind these days, and I see it as a former cop. I've interviewed a lot of domestic violence victims, and I feel like I'm a domestic violence victim as a member of the UFO community, because the people who've been committing the violence are suddenly showing up on the front door with a bouquet of flowers and a box of candy. And suddenly they're being nice. And I can only think of one reason in my mind, and this is what I'd like to hear if anybody else thinks this is possible, is the reason they're being nice that they know something that we don't know, and they want to get ahead of it and be able to define it as it will occur. In other words, there is something coming, and it's big enough that they know that they won't be able to handle it. And this is what's plaguing me right now. I keep rolling this over in my mind because I see little things that hint at it.
That's a great question, and I think Paul wanted to address the last question. Is that correct?
It may have slipped by me.
Okay. Does anybody want to answer James' questions? I think that's a great one.
Oh, I do remember the point I wanted to make.
Okay.
I don't know whether this is helpful or not, but when you look at history over the centuries, you have to say the human race has been in this kind of situation repeatedly. Well, first it was, is the earth flat? does the Earth go around the sun or vice versa? But the really interesting one was meteorites, because all of the intelligentsia of the scientific world knew that rocks could not fall from the sky. And the people that reported rocks falling from the sky were treated very much like UFO witnesses today. They were crazy, they were blasphemous, they were promoting ideas that were impossible. I think at one point it may have been punishable by death to claim it, you see. Somehow we got past that. So will we be fortunate enough to get past these lies? Because we've been victims of deliberate institutional lies here for my lifetime. And this is one of the things that bothers me the most. I like to hear that there's confirmation of extraterrestrial life, but maybe we'll hear that it could do terrible things to us. That it's a disaster for the human race. I think Stephen Hawking thought that could be the case, and he was saying, don't send your signals out into space deliberately trying to contact. You don't know what you're communicating with. So maybe we won't be happy with the result of the answer we get. It's not just as simple of is there life, is it intelligent, isn't there? Or maybe we will. The contactees of the 1950s painted a very hopeful thing. We were getting warnings about our nuclear explosions and about what the human race was doing to the Earth. And they were communicating that they claimed they were getting directly from human-like beings in flying saucers. Been completely dismissed, debunked by the mainstream, by the UFO community, but as you'll hear tomorrow, if you hear my talk about UFO books through the decades, which will be over at the convention center, I think there's every reason to believe that some of those contactees were absolutely telling the truth. Absolutely. There are examples where they revealed things seen by journeying out into space that were confirmed by our astronauts 10 years later. Absolutely indisputably. So we better go back and look at some of those things. So whether disclosure is for the good or for the bad, we wake up to the nightmare that this is really a nightmare problem for the whole human race, and we wish we never knew. We don't know. But what bothers me is having been my whole life the victim of very deliberately placed lies and deceptions, and I'm sick of the game of some of the organizations in this country, scientific organizations, I don't know whether to say the Planetary Society or what, the game that we're still looking for extraterrestrial life, and one of these days we may find it. They found it a long time ago, and they still don't want you to know it. Really, that's what bothers me more than anything else about this field.
All right, Don, I think you wanted to answer James's question. He used the word violence. I've used the term that we've been gaslighted the last few decades.
That's a good way to
Yes,
say
yes,
it.
that is the word. And then I would pose the question even to the rest of you. Why do we believe that the Pentagon has limited the scope of acknowledgement to the year 2004? I would suggest that it provides them with a fallback.
Yes.
That by not acknowledging the phenomena back in the 1940s, obviously the first case that would come up would be Roswell. And anything thereafter, because the skies were totally pristine, they were virgin back then. And the point being that if they keep it contained within the last 20 years, their fallback could still be Space Force, it could be Russia, it could be China, and it's like, but we're being honest. We're telling you exactly what it is. And we're going to all be going, but what about the last 75 years? And that's why we have to be so careful that we're not being set up all over again.
I think and just if I can make a real quick comment on that, is that, typically the game that's been played the last few years has been they wait it out, and I think we've seen that where they're placating Congress, they're placating us, but they're trying to wait it out. I think with the hearings, at least, Congress is saying, hey, we're a lot more serious than you think we are, but they're still playing that game like you're saying. Evidence of that is that crappy video they showed. We know they have better video. We've seen the Nimitz videos. They're better than that stupid video that they showed, but they even said this is what we're working with. No, we know you're working with better than
21
that.
gun camera cases in Blue Book alone.
Right.
That was up to 1969.
Dennis?
In reference to what Don just mentioned, that congressional meeting, I believe it was 144 cases. They came out and said they could figure out one case. That one case was a deflated balloon. Now stop and think. In 1947, we have a weather balloon. In 2021, we have a deflated balloon. We have 74 years of balloon story. Excuse me.
Weren't all of those cases from the Navy too? The 144 cases, Navy?
Yes.
And how many have the Air Force reported? They still haven't found a case. The Air Force still has not.
Air Force.
Just the Navy has been unlucky.
Well, and with the Navy, I think I think you all would agree with this. It's wonderful the Navy's doing this now and being very positive, but where were they before 2017 or 2018? We've not heard a peep from them on this topic for decades. Yes, Tom?
Yeah, Stan Friedman always used to say that we're racing the Undertaker during our investigation. The Undertaker finally has won. It's won a skirmish, but we're ultimately going to win the battle. But my understanding is that the Department of Defense focus is going to be on national security threats. That's what their focus is. NASA has also created one UFO project, and my understanding, I could be wrong, is that they're going to focus on things other than threats to national defense, approach it from a more scientific space environment type focus. So there is hope, at least for me, with the NASA as opposed to the Department of Defense, which is solely a threat to national security. In fact, they will say today, we've never had a UFO case that was a threat to national security. Well, what about the Maelstrom incident from
67 Minuteman missiles. 1967
Yes,
Minuteman missiles.
where they shut down all of our ballistic missiles that are always on alert. When they had a report of a UFO hovering over the front gate, it went off alert. And all 10 silos, that had never happened before. And they investigated and came to the conclusion that an electronic pulse, which is beyond our capacity to produce, is what caused it. So
Actually,
they're lying about that.
Actually, it had happened a year before at Mina. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Mina, South Dakota. Yeah, where 10 went down. And as Bob Salas investigated this more and more, and as he opened up, people that had been involved in seeing these shutdowns of other bases came to him and in public. And he said, it's happened again and again and again. And not just 10 missiles at a time, sometimes 30, 40, 50. And this was one of the things they absolutely, they don't want to go there. When this was brought up in the hearings, when the two witnesses who were supposed to be providing the answers were asked, what do you have to say about the shutdowns at Maelstrom Air Force Base? They said, what shutdowns at Maelstrom Air Force Base? We don't have anything on it. This hasn't been submitted to us, it hasn't come to our attention.
And one hopeful thing is that at least Congress did let them know you've got to go back further than 2004. And part of that hearing was that they will look at historical cases. So hopefully that'll happen. And Don, did you have a comment?
This whole business about only going back to 2004 is really, the very fact that anybody would even say that is really very telling, because I think it's widely known in this field that some of the old cases are really the best cases for very good reason. For example, cases with photographic evidence. Everybody knows how easily photographs nowadays can be faked. But when you go back and look at a photo that was taken in the early 1950s, and yet it withstands computer analysis using millions of dollars of software development and hundreds of hours of analysis, and you come away saying, well, there's really nothing wrong with that. This is not phony. This is something real. That's one of the typical reasons why old cases are good, and it's very obvious why someone would say, let's not go back any further, than say the year 2004, because some of those cases, like the photographic evidence cases, are just too revealing. They don't want you to think about some of those.
Some of the
I think
cases.
one of the reasons, Alejandro, also is that with Roswell, they don't want to talk about Roswell. They just don't want to talk about Roswell because if they admitted, oh yes, we're telling you, yes, it was the crash of a UFO, that means you've been lying to us for 75 years. What else have you been lying to us about? And the other thing is the tactics that they used to suppress the Roswell story were civil rights violations en masse that they used to cover up the story, and they don't want to answer for those. At least, that you can't do that anymore, but back then they could do it because they had just won World War II, et cetera, et cetera. So for those two reasons, they don't ever want to talk about Roswell again, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, the title on their last book was Case Closed.
Right, and I do want to speak to James's question too, in that especially MUFON's being brought flowers, which of course some of you are with MUFON and many of us are formerly with MUFON, but I think one thing we do have to look out for is why and how serious they are. I think that one thing they can do is say, look, we're working with MUFON, we're doing everything we can, and leave it at that. And I think that's one of the tactics we've also seen is, this kind of placation type of thing that we have to look out for. Why don't we open up questions? Unless there's another comment, we'll open up questions to the audience. All right, yes, sir.
Yes, my dad was based here, Roswell, New Mexico Army Air Force Base, and he's credited with flying B-29 with alien bodies on it to Fort Worth, Texas. I know Don and Tom, and I was born here July 4th, 1947.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah, happy birthday.
And I'm telling you, what you guys are saying are fairly accurate, because when I was growing up, I knew where I was from, and if I would tell anybody about Roswell or where I was from, they think I was some kind of nut. However, this year has been fantastic because I got here a little bit late, maybe it was mentioned before, but off an aircraft carrier, there were two F-18s flown because they saw a UFO, I guess several miles out. And that was on 60 Minutes, UFO. And they actually approached this UFO and it was down by the water. I don't know if that was mentioned here or not, but that was...
We haven't gone into detail. That's a 2004 Nimitz case that was in the New York Times in 2017.
Okay. Also, too, Marco Rubio of Florida, state senator, has gone to Congress and tell them we need to look into these things. And supposedly, NASA has announced that they will investigate this at the end of the year to try to find out what's going on. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, we've kind of touched on those things. Don?
We thought we recognized you. We haven't seen you. His father was the late Arthur Ossachuk,
Yes.
who was on the B-29 bomber Straight Flush that on July 9th loaded the crate hidden in bomb. Now just imagine, this is hidden in bomb pit number 1.
With a 5-day-old son.
Right. And loaded into the bomb bay, and they fly to Fort Worth, and there it's the bombardier, Felix Bartucci, First Lieutenant, who recognizes a mortician he went to school with, waiting on the tarmac with the other officers. So why is a mortician waiting for this arrival, waiting for this crate? You brought your father here. He actually came back here after all those years, and we arranged for him to meet with a reluctant witness of ours at that time, Sergeant William Ennis, who was with the 393rd Bomb Squadron. He was a flight mechanic, flight engineer. He would brag about how they could take the silver plates, the B-29s, apart down to the last rivet and put them back together again. Your father helped us turn him. He finally conceded. He went to me, he put his hand on my shoulder, he went, Don, before I go, you have to find out how that damn thing flew. It didn't have a moving part on it. So just imagine that. But again, I mean, I'm sorry, we're hearing it from the horses' mouths. not all these people, well, something crashed. You're amateurs, you're rookies, I'm sorry. And then, just, it's an opinion, and they come a dime a dozen. We're the ones who have talked to over 600 witnesses. And your father, and with William Madison, the pictures we have, they were so happy to be together after then, over 60 years, and how it all rushed back. So, thank you for coming back. And I think your comments. It was Mike. Sorry. It was Mike.
Your name.
For your first.
My name is John.
John,
Junior,
yes,
believe it or not.
Right. So,
Arthur, John Osborne.
Right.
He was one of the last survivors.
Right.
Was he? Okay.
90, he was 90,
94, I think.
94.
Wow. Yes, sir, in the front row here.
Yeah, I got a question about bodies that were found. I've read different stories that it was between 3 to 4 bodies. And my question is, do you feel that it might have been a family of like mom, dad, and their 2 kids? And the one that was still alive, was that a male or a female? And the last part is, where do you believe the bodies are now? In Area 51? What happened?
Yes, the question is, what do we feel about the bodies that were recovered? Were they a family, or what happened to them where they are now? There's no way to know if it was a family or not. There were 5 occupants in the stricken craft. 4 were dead when it was recovered. There was 1 still alive. We always just call it the live one. And it was recovered first to the base here in Roswell. Stayed there for we don't know how long, but it showed up the next spring at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, alive. And we know from the son of one of the witnesses in a class, the Air War College class, that attended indoctrination at Wright-Patterson in the spring of 1948. They were taken into this room and first shown some of the wreckage. And they were told where it was from. You know, somebody said, well, you know, it was all this memory metal. And they said, what is this stuff? Where did you get it? And they said, well, we got it. It was from a crash of a flying saucer in New Mexico last year. They were up front with that. So they're taken in another room, and there was this 2-way mirror or something like that where you can see in, but they can't see you. And so they're taken in there, and there, on the other side of this mirror, was the live one. And we don't know if it was sitting down, standing up, doing calisthenics, or the Macarena. We don't know what it was doing. But the witness said that he had an immediate mental connection with it, that it was very human-like. So this witness who saw this, he felt its human qualities rather than its alien qualities. We don't know when that passed away, but we know where all 5 of them are now. Our latest understanding is that they're in Utah at the Dugway Proving Grounds.
Medical research. Biological research.
Yes, so they have a biological super facility there, and we learned that from the former head of the Foreign Technology Division on a deathbed statement that there were 5 aliens at Dugway.
Colonel Dragon was there, told us. Colonel Thomas Dragon.
I didn't follow that one, Don.
Oh, and we have another witness at Dugway, as far as Colonel Thomas Mountdragon, who was stationed there in the late 50s, and he saw the bodies there at that time. And when I posed the question to the second last director of Project Blue Book, Colonel Robert Friend, who happened to be stationed at Wright Field when the wreckage came in. Nobody knew of that. And when I posed the question to him, if they had bodies, where would they be today? And he immediately snapped, Dugway in Utah, Biological Medical Research Facility. So that's good enough for us.
It was a facility a lot like Area 51. A lot of secret tests were being taken there, very remote, and that's our latest information as to where they are.
So are the bodies all the same size?
Yes, they were all about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, all look like your standard grays. And beyond that, there's no way to speculate any relationship. And that is, my understanding is that you couldn't tell male or female.
All right, ma'am, back here, you had a question? That's you.
Me?
Yep.
Hi, guys. Thank you, first of all, for being such intelligent, tenacious individuals and brave, most of all. So thank you for all of the years you've done. So the question I've got is that I started a meetup this year called Going Down the Rabbit Hole Mindfully. So it's, I had 10 pages of subjects to pick from we hadn't even touched on. One of them was about Roswell. And it was amazing how few people knew about Roswell. To me, I just blows my mind. But anyway, I stumbled across something while researching before that group, something I had never seen. This gentleman called Chuck Wade. And, okay, well he had, no? Okay, well he had, it was a website, he said there were 7 crashes in Roswell. So I want to bring that up to you guys and talk about, I can already see.
That's why he's not sitting here this evening.
The answer's right there, because he was saying that there's 7 crashes?
One of them was a bed.
Okay, so that's a book.
He talked about the claims of St. Augustine. Chuck Wade's daddy owned a bar in Corona. And supposedly that's where Mac had gone and bragged about it.
And they were passing pieces from one end of the bar now.
Yeah, they were passing the pieces around in the bar. The claims of St. Augustine, Stanton talked about that a lot. He was assuming that 2 craft had a mid-air collision. One went down out there, the other went up here on the ranch. To me, that's never been proven. I think the Corona debris site is the site of the debris. As far as Chuck Wade,
I think we would all agree his heart's there. I mean, I think he believes what he's doing is good research. I don't think he's trying to deceive anybody, but certainly our expert panel does not agree with his findings.
right?
That and scientifically, during one of these panels years ago, he came up to the microphone, Mr. Wade. We thought he was going to pose a question. And the next thing, he's claiming he's got a piece of wreckage from the Roswell crash.
Yeah.
The museum paid to have it analyzed. It was aluminum foil.
And that's what he's going to say.
It was crumbled aluminum foil that had compressed in the hot desert sun. But yet he's still claiming it's from the Roswell crash, even after the testing.
Yeah.
This is, this is why we wonder why we're not being invited to that barbecue. Sometimes the UFO community really is its own worst enemy.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to think these things through and not rush to conclusions and weigh the evidence. Don't just buy into it.
All right, another question right here.
So I want to talk about the history of the Roswell incident. And Nathan and I were privileged and went out to the Mac Brazel site a few years ago. We went out to the Sci-Fi Channel dig site, and I learned that about a couple of years ago that they dismantled the Mac Brazel site's been razed, and they dismantled the monument at the Sci-Fi Channel site, and they took down the plaque as well. I find that heartbreaking, that individuals do that, and they're trying to bury the history of what happened in those spots. And do you have any comments on that?
I'm aware of that, Don.
Yes. We were in the process of putting together another archaeological dig on the same scale as the sci-fi dig from 2002, which was with a backhoe, tractor, with a helicopter, university as far as sponsored and funded by the Sci-Fi Channel. And we were checking out other sites, and Tom would remember that we kept hearing about an old Spanish well. Because in the haste to clear out the site, and just like the main pump site #1, that during the night the troops were dumping wreckage down into the well, hundreds of feet down. So we're out there, again, scoping all these different locations for coming in and really hitting it hard. And we come back, and there's a concrete cap over the well, freshly poured, a week before. They threatened to destroy our monument, that if we didn't remove it, they would destroy it. The old Heinz house, been there since the 30s. It's the one-room shack that the night that Jesse Marcel and Sheridan Cabot, when the rancher led them back, as ordered by Colonel William Blanchard to investigate the crash, that's where they spent the night. And it was where the livestock shed was located, where even in the press release issued by the Roswell Army Airfield, it states that the disc was stored in a livestock shed. They destroyed all of that.
Who's they?
Who's they?
Who's they? The new owners. The new owners. But the point is, who put them onto it?
Dinwiddie Land and Cattle Company. I know their name. I do not know them. They are not nice
They're
people.
not nice
Every
people.
rancher that's out there that surrounds them hate them.
And so do we.
Right?
Don't you remember, you and I went up to look in the caves too?
Yes, yeah.
Because we had heard that they may have thrown some of the stuff into these caves.
And I was on an adjoining ranch. It was the late Dan Richards. He was a bit of a tap rat. And we're not done with that one either. We know where the cave is, and we just have to find a detonation expert to blow open the opening.
So any demolition experts come on. Dr. Don.
I think it was a mother and a daughter or sisters that supposedly owned the land, and the shack was still there.
Bogles.
Previous owners.
Was that
Yeah, yes,
just
yeah.
previous
That's the
to this?
previous
That's right.
Okay.
And
They
they
seem
tried to
like
make
they were
it,
willing to-
and as Mark remembers, and all of us that go back to the beginning, we had a professional agreement with the owners of the ranch at that time, and that was William and Donald Bogle.
The original.
The original owners. And the daughters, after the grandfather passed away, decided to make it into a tourist attraction. And we tried to stop it. There were pictures of them on their Facebook dancing like chorus line girls on top of our monument and kicking in their short shorts. So that's all it was to them. But we stopped it. It only happened 1 year. Because to us, it's still an active archaeological site. And we're going to treat it as respectfully and professionally. Because after all, if this is true, then people died out there. They may not have been from here, but they still died out there.
I want to interject something. Several years ago, the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, did an environmental impact study on the ranch. They do them every so often. So I went out to the BLM to get a copy of it. I took it home, I read it, about the 7th or 8th page, it said something about being careful because there are aliens out here. The next morning, I was at the BLM office when it opened. I said, I want to know who wrote this article. I said, it's signed off by 7 people from the BLM. Oh, he said, that was a joke. It won't be in the final copy. I said, here's my address, sent me a copy of the final one. 2 months later, I get a final copy. In that report, the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, in there, the BLM says, this is the alleged site of the 1947 Roswell incident. You cannot build on top of that site, and you can't do any direct drilling. You have to side drill it. To me, that was big. For the BLM to at least admit that something may have happened there. They didn't say it didn't happen. This is the alleged site. And to me, coming from a government agency, I thought that was pretty important.
Branch of the Department of Interior acknowledged that this is where the alleged flying saucer crashed in 1947. Didn't say a weather balloon.
Frank?
Yeah, hey, come to my talk tomorrow it's after 10 o'clock or so, because I actually have a copy of that document, and it's still out there. It's BLM Land Allotment Survey number 6138, and it actually has in it that you need to be careful of strange alien creatures and biological contamination at the site. It's out there, it's still there, it was never redacted. I'm sure it was a joke, but it got lots of people's attention if you know where to look. It's a small document they give to ranchers when they're getting ready to run cattle in a general area. So it's like an assessment, and I have that. I have a copy of that document. I'll send it to anybody that wants it.
Great. Yes, sir.
Do these dimwitty people have anything to do with government contacts?
Oh, this is all I know about them. They are a extremely wealthy land and cattle company. They specialize in mostly water rights. So they don't run a lot of, I don't think they run a lot of cattle. But they have lots and lots of money, enough so they can go in almost any place they want and buy whatever they want. So I think that's all I know about them.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Wouldn't it make sense if the government really wanted to continue to bury this, that they would get pressure on Dinwiddie to do something nasty or be nasty?
I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean,
Checks in the
after
mail.
all this time.
Maybe we have our oligarchs too.
I know I can still get in there, and because I can bypass their lane and come in another direction. I'm not worried about it.
Just real quick, I think we had one, was it in the middle?
I have a question.
Okay, let's get that one
When
up front.
in the case in Utah, where they have the aliens, do they also take them from all over the world? Because my husband was telling me that in Mexico, flying saucer fell there, and there was some aliens there.
Like the San Antonio case?
The United States went over there
Oh,
and
yeah.
took them from Mexico, so I don't know where, so.
Does anybody know that case very well? I know Ruben Uriarte, I know.
Is that the Del Rio?
Yeah, that's Del Rio, that's that one.
Yeah, Ruben Uriarte, he's kind of the specialist on that case, I think.
And Torres.
And Torres, yeah, his partner. So, yeah, but we are aware there is a research of a potential case there.
If they find something from states in another country, do they always take it to the Utah or somewhere over there?
To Dugway, I mean, she's asking, whenever, as far as you know, whenever a body is recovered, do you believe that it's taken to Dugway?
I would assume that the way governments work, if such a thing is found, it would become the property of the local military authority, which, if it fell in the ex-Soviet Union, it would be Russian control, and Chi-Com, it would be Chinese control, so it would depend.
Stan Friedman and I did a lecture in Del Rio, and they were talking about that case, and I believe that's the one where it collided with a private airplane, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Real quick, we have a question up front, and then we've got a couple in the back. We'll get to you. Yes, sir.
Thanks. I have a question for whoever wants to jump in, but as a journalist who really is not steeped at all in UFO history and research, just sort of trying my best to get my head around it. But I spent a lot of my time covering the government and government records and sort of what reports has the government done, what kind of investigations. I'm curious, how do you all, as researchers, reconcile, on the one hand, this narrative that the government has lied, hidden, obstructed the public from knowing what's going on, with what is often government documents and reports that are used by UFO researchers to sort of support their own conclusions and cases and theories. In other words, on the one hand, the government's a liar, but if there's a government report from the Interior Department, as an example, that seems to lend credence to a theory or a conspiracy, how do you take that seriously, but then everything else the government says is a lie?
You're talking apples and oranges.
So, yeah, so like, I think his question would be, yeah, on the one hand, we have the BLM document, which says there's something to it. On the other hand, we have like case closed, like we mentioned earlier, which says the opposite. Yeah, and Dennis, how do you reconcile that difference?
Well, if we know it's the truth, we accept it. If it's not the truth, we're gonna tell you it's not the truth.
You have to already know the truth.
Do what?
You have to already know the truth before you do,
Unreliable.
before you assess.
We have the factual
documents.
information already. And
If it's on the internet, it's
support
true,
that
you know.
some way.
So in other words, if it aligns with the research, and the abundance of research they've done, then they can confirm it or not.
Right.
Is that, would that be the answer?
But the government, I guess what I run across is sometimes the government is considered a valid source if it supports something that you think you already have done research on is true.
How often is
But then
that?
often it's not a valid source because they're lying and hiding everything. So just in my brain, it's hard sometimes to reconcile.
Well, but the same could be true of any document that, you know, it depends on who's putting together that document.
Right.
And their intent of that document. In the case of the BLM, they're trying to warn people who potentially, or make fun. In the case of case closed, it kind of is along the lines of what Don said, you don't send anybody to the hill that can accidentally tell the truth. And certainly with those documents, the investigators were not knowledgeable. I think that could be fairly said. I think that, and not only that, their investigation was pretty limited in that, for instance, they didn't talk to Marcel, but they talked to Cabot. And in fact, their list of witnesses they talked to were very, very, very short. So I think those would be sort of aspects of that. So unfortunately, I guess, as we all know these days, you have to take anything the government gives you with a grain of salt and look into it before you take it
They lie.
at face value.
They lie.
And I think you probably found that in your work as well.
We can tell them.
Oh, I've been lied to many times.
Yeah. In the back, sir, in the black. Back in black.
This is for Don. I'm new, this is my first time to Roswell, so I want to get clarification. The crash site, the sci-fi dig, was that the one done 75, 80 miles from here? Or is it the one at Corn Ranch?
Where the sci-fi dig was, which John would know, well, Don and Tom were involved with that. Was the sci-fi, yeah, he's talking about the two different sites, Corn Ranch? I'm not familiar with that site.
Corn Ranch,
Yeah,
22 miles up and 5 miles west.
and is that an alleged crash location, or?
Isn't that the Frank,
Frank Kaufman.
isn't that the Frank Kaufman story?
Yeah, that's Frank Kaufman's site. I went out there with him one time, and I was standing at the site, was what he said was the site. I said, Frank, where exactly did this happen? Right there. That was his answer.
We knew the corn site wasn't the correct site from the very beginning because all of our witnesses were pointing to 10 miles further north. And during the sci-fi documentary, we spent days in a helicopter because we were looking specifically for a downed wooden windmill for the water tank. And we did finally discover it. Not during the sci-fi project, but later. And we've been there since, and that's one of the areas that we have yet to work, and we plan to. But multiple sites involved, one object, there wasn't a collision. Plains of San Augustine was a plane crash years before. But what the curious thing was, why was the sheriff out there? Why were deputies out there? Why was a fire crew chief out there with a fireman? We can name names, but the point is, it had to be within their jurisdiction, within this county. The brief field is in another county. So it kept pointing to something much closer to town. And so our assumptions were correct. And so that was part of the sci-fi project, but it's what we will continue to, and as I said, it's a site we're going to work in the future.
What was interesting was during the 2002 dig, we had the helicopter, as Don said. we overflew the area and we were looking for a downed windmill to mark the site. We could not see it. It was amazing. And the way we found it was we had come across a documentary that a former researcher was putting together, and they filmed at this site. And when we saw that, we recognized where that was. And sure enough, we went out there, and there was the downed windmill. And that was this impact site. I believe the downed windmill is now gone to, it just rotted away. But that's how we found it. One thing leads to another. And I still don't know why we didn't see it in the helicopter.
We didn't fly
So anyway, that's how we found it. And the witnesses, the military witnesses, were telling us about a site that was closer to Roswell than where the Kaufman site was, which was the original site. So you use what you get. We go by there's a saying from the father of American anthropology. His name is Franz Boas. He says, develop enough data and the answer will fall to you like a ripe fruit. And that's our motto. Develop enough data, then when you get a document, you can compare the document to what you already know. And that's how we do it. You just can't take everything or anything at face value. Where does it possibly fit in here? And things like that. So develop enough information and the answer will fall to you like a ripe fruit.
The ranch owner is really nice too.
All right, and next question back in the very back here.
Kind of a two-part, in conjunction with two books I read, and one I apologize was about 25 years ago. I think it was Philip Corso came out with The Day After Roswell, with the incorporation of like fiber optics, I think microchips from the crash into research and development. Has there been any further substantiation or others that have come forward kind of saying yes, that's what we did? And then also with that, what are your thoughts on the, I can't remember the title, it's an Area 51 book that the premise of the Roswell crash was a hoax by the Russians, or was like some
By the Germans, the
Anna Jacobson book?
Yeah, I mean, these guys can address it. So any updates on Corso? We talked about him a little bit before, but maybe if there's any new revelations, which I don't think there are, but, and then Annie Jacobson, and did you want to answer that?
Yeah, I read her book, and she had a map of New Mexico. I don't remember the exact number, but I believe she said it was 60 miles from Roswell to Albuquerque.
Whoa.
I've never been able to find that route.
We make a mistake like that, they never let us forget.
That's right.
And I do know that there was a follow-up to Annie Jacobson's book in that claim, and there were a couple articles that came out, and I think it was NBC that really did a kind of a larger expose on it. But the guy who had said that said she misrepresented what he had said, and that when he had said that, they were only kind of speculating about things, and that he certainly did not claim that that is what happened. So I know that person had come forward and said that.
I think there's one thing that you people need to know about researchers. So many of these researchers claim to be experts on Roswell. 90% of them have never been to Roswell. They don't know where the crash site is. They never interviewed a witness, but they claim to be experts.
Yeah, another question up here, because he hasn't asked one yet.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but you had mentioned that he's the son of Colonel Bennett. I'm sorry, at the very beginning.
Sergeant William Ennis, correct.
I don't want to put
No,
you
that
on the
was with,
spot, but
yeah.
what was his, did he confess anything? Did he?
He was a flight engineer.
I mean, his father.
No, with John Ossechuk's father.
Okay, but was
My
it?
dad was the base adjutant. He was responsible for pulling troops in from different bases and assigning them to the debris field for cleanup. He also had to forge documents I say forged, he altered identities, so the guys that were at the debris field during the cleanup could not contact or find each other afterward to be able to talk with each other. That was the lengths they had to go to cover it up. And so that was his role. He was responsible for a good part of the cover-up, I would have to admit, which is kind of what the vein of what you guys are talking about is, you know, you're about the truth and he was about covering things up. I'm a little conflicted about even being in here.
I think everybody feels you're certainly welcome.
No, he laid breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
Right. There were others that we always talk about. Lieutenant Colonel at the time he died, Edwin Easley, was the provost marshal, and we finally located him in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So he's provost marshal. He's in charge of the MPs. He's in charge of all security on the base. So one can imagine what security measures were taken as far as the recovery operation. And my partner at that time, Kevin Randall, when he found him and we were talking to him, and he kept stating over and over again, I can't talk about that, I'm still sworn to secrecy. No matter what the question, I can't talk about that.
Did he say, I promised the president I wouldn't talk about that?
Well, that was later, with his deathbed confession. But we promised him a copy of our first book, which we sent. And then we were at the Center for UFO Studies office in Chicago. We called, hoping he had read the book, which he did. And then we asked, well, you see which direction the witnesses are taking us. Can you at least tell us if we're going in the right direction? And in a classic military response, he said, let's just say you're not going in the wrong direction. So again, breadcrumbs. So they helped where they could. And your father did as well. And certainly your father, John, as well. Thank you.
All right, another question. How about near the aisle there in the glasses?
Sir, yes, thanks, guys. I'm just trying to wrap my head around all this information that's been given out tonight. You know, and I'm trying to project to the future as to how this is all going to play out, because we know that our military has its national security interests. And even in the future, if there's other crashes that happen, UFOs and that, who are the first people that are going to come on the scene? It's going to be your military. They are then going to contort and misconstrue and put out misinformation before the truth can even get out. Now, I know this gentleman over here on the end mentioned the fact that we need to contact our congressmen and start writing to them and trying to get the truth out. But how do you get around the military power that this country wields to be able to get the truth out? And therein lies, and you guys, all your experience that you've had over, I congratulate you guys on all your efforts and everything. And my family is all about the truth too. And we're all here about the truth. But when you have a military interest involved, national security, they want to ram down the American people's throat that they are in control and that everything's going to be okay. And that, you know, there ain't no aliens. They don't want to upset the American people, psychic about any of that kind of extraterrestrial stuff. But how do we go about?
Yeah, I think that there are
out there. I mean, how do you conflict that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes, the answer for us is real easy. We've never thought that the government, the military, was going to help us out to the final solution. And what we've done is we have put together a case that has over 600 first and second-hand witnesses. We have witnesses at the crash site. We have witnesses at the recovery to Roswell base. We have witnesses on the flight to Fort Worth. We have witnesses on the flight to Wright-Patterson. We have witnesses at the autopsy. We have all that information. So we don't need the government to tell us what happened. We already know. Now the problem is, when Don and I hooked up in 1998 to continue the proactive investigation of the case, we took if you can imagine a football field with the ball on the 50-yard line. We've taken it down to the 1-yard line. The only thing missing in this case for ultimate solution is a piece of physical evidence. Most notably, what Don and I call the Holy Grail of Roswell, which is a piece of the memory metal.
Yes.
There was a lot of it. We know some ranchers got a hold of pieces, some military got a hold of pieces. There are pieces out there. Once someone with a piece of that comes forward, he or she will be able to demonstrate if they can get on television or something. You don't need to send it away to a lab and never hear about it again, which is what happens now. You know, probably right here at the UFO Museum, we would hold a press conference. Someone would demonstrate this piece of memory metal. We still don't have anything like it, and there is the solution to the case, short of something landing on the White House lawn. I don't know if Don believes that. I think he pretty much does.
You know,
agree with me, Don?
Of course I do, and that's why the future lies in our hands. That's why we have to step out our efforts. The only reason I encourage us to at least approach, as we have reached out from after the first congressional meeting, the hearing, that because it was one of my state reps, Representative Gallagher, who actually cited Malmstrom, a specific case involving a shutdown of a firing line of Atlas missiles.
Minutemen, is that the same?
What else can we tell you? How can we help you? We may never have this opportunity again. And I guess I like to believe we all would say, we gave it our best shot. And once again, the arbiters of the cover-up, unless we also forget, Dwight Eisenhower's final warning to us when leaving the presidency about the military as far as industrial complex. And that's where, when we're asked, where's the Roswell evidence today? Government doesn't have it. Military doesn't have it. It's all in the hands of the private corporations. Lockheed, Boeing, Patel, Grant, Hughes, General Electric. We have first-time witnesses to that effect.
Don, can I ask you a question? What about Homestead Air Force Base in Florida and the Jackie Gleason case? The bodies were there, as we were heard. So how does that fit in?
We have to quickly, the idea that the late comedian, entertainer, housing star Jackie Gleason was a big golfing buddy of then President Richard Nixon. And that he would be picked up after a golf outing privately. There's no problem with the president getting in a car and sneaking some place as far as without the Secret Service. God knows Bill Clinton was doing it all the time. And there's even an incident involving as far as Harry Truman, who got pulled over and cited for a speeding ticket for racing back to a meeting at the White House. So times were different, but nonetheless, that Nixon would take Gleason to Homestead and show him a number of recovered bodies. And it changed Nixon's life, Gleason's life. Accumulated 700 books on UFOs, a house that was designed to look like a flying saucer. He became an associate with Center for UFO Studies with Dr. Hynek. Something had happened. But the point being, how does Nixon fit in? Who was Chief of Staff of the Army in 1947 when the Roswell incident happened? Dwight Eisenhower. So he would have known as much about Roswell as anyone. And who was Eisenhower's vice president for 8 years? Richard Nixon. So that's the tech. It's possible. We only regret that. I was with the late Paul Harvey at ABC News in Chicago when I was trying to encourage him, because he too was a golfing buddy of Jackie Gleason. We need to try to get a deathbed from him. we ran out of time.
All right, yep, just time for a couple more questions, but yes, this young gentleman here.
Just kind of a practical question. I'm wondering if there's any way to get out to the various crash sites. I know, I think, Don, Tom, you talked about 3 crash sites. Is there a way, is that all private property, or like the Corona crash site, can you get there because of the new landowners? What about those other 2? I think the Proctor site and there's another final 3 crash sites supposedly. Is there any way to go there?
Yeah, I know, Frank, I mean, you've been to those sites, I've been to the site, but it was a long time ago, and I think things has changed, it sounds like. Tom, did you?
Yeah, are you asking about the 3 sites?
Yeah, if it's accessible, if the public can go there.
Yes, the first site was the main site where we believe the craft first skipped along the ground. It was in trouble, it became airborne again, and it was either an internal explosion, or if it was external, it was either a lightning strike or some sort of radar pulse. There was radar on the ground that might have flown through some sort of centric where the radar connected. So that's what we call the debris field site. Mac Brazel found it the day after the crash, which was July the 3rd. He found it, so the crash was on July the 2nd, late in the evening. Found it on the next day with a 7-year-old rancher son from the closest ranch, D. Proctor. So that's the first site, the most well-known site.
And is that accessible by the public, was the question?
I'm sorry?
Is that accessible by the public? Can the people go there?
No, it was never, the site is on BLM, at least it used to be, I think it still is, BLM property, but it's surrounded by private property.
The actual site is BLM property. The actual site.
But it's landlocked by private, and the monument was still a quarter mile away.
Yes.
There's about 600 feet of private property to go through, and that means it's landlocked. Got a helicopter, that's about the only way to get in.
It's BLM, right?
It is.
All right, yeah, next question here.
If you could please clarify, I don't quite understand about the 3 sites. You're saying the theory is that it hit, and then it went airborne about 25 miles, and exploded, is that right?
So there's a skip site, like you described, skipped. So there's one site, the debris field, which is the one that we know about, that we were talking about.
And the D. Proctor body site.
Can you describe what that is?
That's on private land.
But like, what's the background of that?
Don was at 2.5 miles roughly from the crash site. The D. Proctor body site.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Sorry, Don.
The D. Proctor site is
D. Proctor
2.5 miles
yeah.
east-southeast of the debris field. The final impact site is another 25 miles from there, about 35 miles north of town here.
And the D. Proctor site is where bodies were found, is that what you're?
Within a number of days after the crash, as the ranchers typically would scout for circling birds, suggesting a downed cow or sheep because of the lightning, which in the high desert strikes the ground. And it led them, it was Brazel, his son Vernon, D. Proctor, hired hand son by the name of Sidney Jack Wright, and we believe a young girl by the name of Eddington, who went to the top of that bluff. And D. Proctor, before he died, and his mother, Loretta Proctor, she had a blood clot in her carotid artery, and who made every effort to flee and leave whenever we came and talked to him. We would never talk about him. He was one of our most reluctant witnesses. And his mother being very sick, he stops by, Mom, I need to show you something. He helps her into his pickup truck. They drive past, he thinks she's going to finally hear about the debris field, that he was out there, that type of thing. He takes her to this bluff, 2.5 miles, parks at the top of the bluff. He helps her out, and all he says to her is, Mom, this is where Mac found something else. And that was the beginning.
Yes, what we believe is that when the ship exploded with a lightning strike or whatever, 2 of the occupants were blown out and came to meet their fate on top of the low bluff, the D. Proctor site. So 2 were blown out, there's still 3 inside. The ship continues for another 25, 35 miles, comes to rest about 30 miles north of town. Now, this is where the fireman, Dan Dwyer, comes in, because he heard about it through the city manager came into the fire station and is telling the fire company, don't go out there, there's been a crash on the town, don't go out there, the military will handle it. Well, Dan Dwyer says, hell they are. So he gets in his own car and goes out there with his fellow crewman, Lee Reeves. And he's one of the first ones to this third site called the impact site. The D. Proctor site we just call the D. Proctor site. This is the impact site where the rest of the craft, we believe it was the inner cabin withstood the explosion. And so there's 3 left. They come to rest at the impact site just north of town. 2 of them were found to be dead. And this is from Dan Dwyer's daughter, Frankie Rowe. 2 of them were already dead, but there was one still alive, that we call the live one, walking around, stumbling around, alive. And the family, Dwyer's family, what did it look like that? What did it look like? He said, well, it looked like the child of the earth. Well, the child of the earth is a better name for it is the Jerusalem cricket or the potato bug. It had the face of one of these, I won't call it an insect, it's an arthropod of some sort, like a scorpion or something, but the face resembled that. So all he said was child of the earth, and they knew what he meant. Well, did you talk to it? Did you talk to it? Yes, we talked to one another, but not like we're talking now, by using our mouth and our tongue and our vocal cords. We talked to one another in our heads. Well, what did you say? What did you talk about? Well, the creature sensed that Dan Dwyer was concerned about it. He was concerned about its fate. So the alien creature, we would call it mental telepathy today. Talked to him in his head. He said, the creature said, don't worry about me. I accept my fate. My comrades are dead. My ship is destroyed. I accept what has happened. And then that's when the military arrived and took over the site. So that's what we know about how the 3 sites came about.
And then just to clarify, the 3 sites are not publicly accessible, none of them, nor would you recommend that anybody try to go to them, if I'm correct.
Correct.
That is correct. So just to get back with your answer. Yes, sir.
2 questions. One, the impact site, you indicated there was 2 dead aliens there and 1 live one. Was that the oval-shaped craft that they brought back on the flatbed?
Right.
Yes.
Right down Main Street on the way.
Egg shaped, the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, correct?
Right. The second question I've got is the map that's inside over here in the research section. It shows the location of the debris site and the impact site. It doesn't show the B proper site. Was there any reason why it doesn't?
It's because we've never publicized it.
Okay.
All right, and I think what I'd like to do now is get kind of final thoughts from everybody. We've got like 5 minutes, so we'll need to keep them kind of short. 5 minutes for most crowds might be a lot of time, but for this one, I think these guys, have a lot of information. So maybe we'll go down the line, and we'll start with James again, and especially considering where we are today, and you're hopefulness or not so much about where we'll be going in the future.
I think we're hopeful because people are asking more and more questions. Everybody wants to know about the reality of alien life contacting mankind. And I still believe that the proof of that will transform civilization and the way that we treat each other. And whatever fear we have is based upon the fact that we are afraid that the aliens will treat us as badly as we sometimes treat our fellow human beings. And I'm really glad to be here, and I'm very grateful for all of you paying attention.
I teach school, and when the students find out that I'm, they go, I call them creepers. I say, you guys are watching all these documentaries that are out there, and they see the ones that I'm in, and they say, can we talk about UFO? We need to keep that curiosity going for our students. that are out there, because, you know, they may be the generation that actually does the true disclosure for us. Because they're smart, there's lots of them that are very smart, and they are tremendously curious, and they want to learn more. So you know what, that saying from the X-Files, the truth is out there. I believe that, it is, and we'll find it. Eventually, it may not come tomorrow, but it will come soon.
All right, thank you. Yes, Bob.
I'd like to leave you with the final information of how you can see the Showtime film Roswell that I produced. You can just search online and put in Roswell, the UFO cover-up film, and a link to it will come up. It's posted several places online. I think it's on YouTube. Nobody seems to be taking it down. And if you go to MUFONtelevision.com, on the home page, you'll see that you can click on an interview I did called Back to Roswell. It's an interview with Ron James, who runs MUFON Television, where our main subject is to take the Roswell movie apart, scene by scene, and talk about how it conforms with the facts that we actually know, and if there are any places in the movie where either fiction or speculation has been introduced. And I recommend you might want to take the time to do that. I think you'd find the film very entertaining. I think it had, and thanks to Don's contribution to it for the book we based it on, and Kevin Randall, his writing partner, I think it had a historic influence on the public recognition of the fact that there was a Roswell incident and that they've never been told the truth about it by any official body. So that's what I offer.
Great, thank you.
Well, just to reiterate something I said before, the truth is coming out, but it's not going to be coming from the government. It's not going to be coming from the military. Basically, we have a great deal of information thanks to people present here, and it's the scientific method at work. All right, basically, we were talking about thousands of interviews, hundreds of witnesses, careful analysis, careful thought. The truth isn't arrived at by somebody handing it to you. You know, the truth is arrived at by basically digging it out, and that's what's happening.
Like I said before, I don't think I'll be around when the truth comes out because of my age. It's been an absolute blessing for me to be able to work with people like Stanton Freeman and Don Schmitt all these years. I particularly thank you for the confidence that you have shown in us. This has been the most frustrating thing I've ever done in my life. I had 33 years of civil engineering, which I enjoyed, but the fight with the government and the military all the time has been tough. But I think the truth is so important that somebody needs to keep it going. It won't be me, it'll be some of these guys, and hopefully some of the younger people will get interested. And like I said earlier, don't accept what you've been told. Ask questions and demand answers.
I agree with everything said here at the end so far. It's important to remember that the idea that, as we've heard the questions, that, well, the government is making sure the water rights are controlled by that one entity or something, that one company, so you can't go and look at stuff. But at the same time, people think our lovely Congress, who are, you know, so pure and clean, that they're going to help us and get it out. That's not compatible. That's not how the world works that I know. So I'm not expecting much to happen unless people like us up here do something about it. And we're continuing to do something.
You can probably already tell I'm not hopeful with the government solution to this. I believe these committees that they've created are a smokescreen, I really do. And the answer is going to come as I described tonight. We will continue to gather more information, but quite frankly, we've really solved the case. And The only thing we are missing is that piece of physical evidence. Lawyers have told us who have read our books that if we had a hypothetical trial with the government or the military, it would be a victory for us, hands down, because they have no witnesses, zero witnesses. How can you defend a case with no witnesses? And the so-called Project Mogul and the dummies from the sky, as we call them, that they claim were the bodies that people saw. People see through that, but they're doubling down, and the answer is going to come from certainly a continued exposure of the case, and perhaps someone will come forward with that holy grail that we've been looking for all these years.
How many here have ever read the Wikipedia entry on Roswell? And you would all agree that it's 100% skeptics.
Oh, yeah.
100%. Blake Stan Friedman would call me constantly, Don, what are we going to do? We got to rewrite that. And each and every time we would make an attempt to interject our own positions within 24 hours. Within 24 hours. Point being, like the old saying, you never get any flack unless you're over the target.
Yeah.
The skeptics right now, and they're not skeptics, the debunkers, the scoffers, they are apoplectic. I have never seen them so rabid as far as Roswell, the Travis Walton case, the Hill incident, Wendelship. It's as though we clearly must be over the target. It's as though it's one last gasp on their part because they know they've never won the war. I constantly remind them, I mean, you engage us because, and you claim you won, but you never have, and you know it. So I'd like to say to all of my colleagues here on this dais this evening, I for one am looking forward to sticking the dagger in and twisting it. Because these people have provided nothing. I mean, they will all go to their graves and they can honestly say, well, that was a lifetime well spent. No, they've contributed nothing. We would like to believe that we have, because our desire will continue to be the truth, and we applaud you for being here also looking for that truth, and I thank you. Good point.
All right.
If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites. Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond, so let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the vortex.